Welcome to this little pop-up session. I'm Tracy Jarvis, the director of PESI UK, and Dr. Sue Johnson and I are here today. We're just really going to have a brief conversation. We've got the Women's Trauma Summit next week, Thursday, Friday, and we're broadcasting globally for this really essential summit, looking at women's trauma from a clinical perspective, from every modality, really taking a deep dive into PTSD, complex trauma, you name it. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Sue Johnson. You are a pioneer in attachment. You've done remarkable work. We gave you the Lifetime Achievement Award earlier this year at the Networker, and it's a real honor to have you with me today to discuss women's trauma.
Oh, Tracy, thank you. I'm honored to be here. It's such an important topic. It's such an important topic.
So let's talk a little bit about, you've been researching attachment, trauma, women and men's issues for many, many years. Talk a little bit about how attachment impacts trauma and pretty much women's trauma, if we just focus on that specifically.
Well, I think there's lots of ways into that. I mean, I think one of the things that's important, which helps me understand how twice as many women as men end up with PTSD symptoms, is that what attachment really tells us is, in very simple language, how much we need intimate relationships, particularly as we're growing up, but all through our life. But particularly, we need this safe connection with a few intimate others in order to face life, deal with our own vulnerability, grow, find out who we are, all these things, really develop a sense of self. And what strikes me is that what we know about the trauma that happens to women is that trauma usually happens in a relationship context. And it is interpersonal, and it is often, at least it appears, it looks from the stories and from the victims' accounts, intentional. And so my understanding of what happens to women is they are much more likely to be sexually and physically abused, particularly in intimate relationships. They are much more likely to be raped, for example, and often by someone they know, that they've met, often somebody who they hope they would be able to connect with. So at the same time as they are pushed into overwhelming powerlessness, helplessness, taken over, right, feel that their whole life and even their own body becomes uncontrollable, they are also robbed of the most basic way we have as human beings of dealing with overwhelming traumatic experience, which is the sense that we can trust other people. And we can turn to others to calm our nervous system, to get a more perspective on what happened, on who we are, to help us create a coherent story. I mean, we've worked with couples where there's been one person who's been sexually and physically abused all through their childhood, right? And now we work in emotionally focused individual therapy, EFIT, with these people. And the essence is, from an attachment point of view, they've not only, if you like, faced the dragon, right, which it renders us all powerless, they faced it alone. And they faced it with the deep understanding in their nervous system and their brain that other people will not see you. They can't be counted on, to the extent that not only is this about the perpetrator and their relationship with the perpetrator, it's about that this kind of trauma is still, even in our society, a shameful secret.
Yes.
The client I'm working with right now in EFIT, her favorite phrase that she brings up again and again is suffer in silence. Suffer in silence. She was brutally abused by her brothers all through her childhood. And she suffered in silence because she was scared, but they told her, if you ever tell anybody, but also, she felt that this secret would break up her family, and her father would commit murder. He would turn into a murderer if he knew. So all her life she was alone with this debilitating, corrosive, traumatic experience happening all the time. And then, of course, the final betrayal is when he did find out about it. He dismissed it as childhood mistakes.
Wow.
Yeah. So, these women come in to see us. And by the way, a lot of these women have a huge number of, this lady had 5 diagnoses, I believe. We talked about her depression, and in therapy with me, we changed that. It's a big, vague phrase, and we take those big, vague phrases and we turn them into explicit experience, right? And what we come up with is, no, she's not depressed. She's heartbroken, is what she is. And what you do with, and if you can really tune into your specific emotions, there's a way, and the way to deal with them is obvious. What you do with heartbreak is you weep. You see that small wounded part of you, and with a safe other, which in this case is the therapist, but this lady also has another resource, another relationship in her life, which she doesn't allow in when she first comes to see me because it's too scary, right? But with safe others, she can see how completely vulnerable she was, how she had no control in her life, how alone she was. And she can weep for that little one and hold that little one and comfort that little one. And that creates more emotional balance. It changes how she deals with the trauma that keeps coming for her in terms of memories. It creates new cognitions, and it takes her into the drama of how she defines herself in a different way. That's the other thing about these things that happen to women, perhaps because so often they're sexual, is that women just feel completely ashamed, and they define themselves in terms of the trauma. You can go to war and you can have terrible single traumatic experiences, or you can, that's a whole different context, in a war. But when this is happening to you as a child, when you don't understand it, and it's happening to you in the where you're supposed to feel safe and you need to feel safe, it's a secret, you have, and you can't trust others to tell them about it. Oi, this is no surprise.
Yeah.
That these people are the most wounded of all. And I think it's outrageous that our big ways of deciding on diagnoses, which I don't put much faith in anyway, like the DSM, they won't recognize complex PTSD. They say that it's just simply more extreme trauma. No, it isn't. Attachment tells us very clearly that if you are a little one who needs safe haven, secure base, who counts on other people to help you make sense of your inner world and your outer world, and those people are paradoxically also, they're not the solution to your fear, they're the source of your fear. Those people are your abusers. You are in the most dreadful, dreadful position for a human being, for a bonding, social human being who needs connection. So I think, that's how I understand. That's one of my main ways of thinking about women's trauma. The good news is that some of the evidence is that women are more likely to go for therapy and they're more likely to be open to learning about that social support. Somehow it's more accepted in our role as women that we, I think the phrase in psychological literature is we tend and befriend. That's how we deal with, we stick together and we turn towards each other. We're more used to doing that as women, right?
Quite.
So I think this says a lot, that women will come for therapy, and there is some evidence that they respond to it more. Certainly our experience, and we just have a huge study that we've just finished now on EFIT with traumatized and depressed and anxious folks. Our experience is that these women do come to us, they stay with us, they go through, and they can really go into these corrective emotion experiences. But to do this, it seems to me, well, the only way we know how to do it, and what really gets amazing results for us, is that you have to have a map to people's emotions, to their longings and their vulnerabilities, which attachment gives us. And you have to have learned the skills as a therapist to be able to create that safe haven and go in and stay with those people. Hey, Tracy, I'm supposed to be answering your questions, and I'm just rabbiting on. I'm so sorry.
This is absolutely great, because Sue, you have been sort of saying things, when I conceptualized this conference, it was actually back in 2020. There were so many sort of domestic abuse instances, sexual abuse instances happening during COVID, where women couldn't actually escape because everyone was locked down. So I came up with this idea that we would have this Women's Trauma Summit. It's now in its third year, growing bigger and better. And one of the things I've been thinking about, what are the core modalities that really help, give women a healing, different experience? And EFIT is one of those modalities. So talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind, that really corrective emotional experience that you've just mentioned, and how that really helps, help heal women's trauma, whether it's sort of simple trauma, sort of more complex trauma. Really just talk about the core of the model clinically, please.
Yes. Well, what we do in EFIT is we look at how you regulate your emotions, and how the ways you have of protecting yourself from those emotions, like shutting down. Maybe they protected you when you were very powerless, but now they've become a prison that just keeps you alone and keeps you traumatized. So we look at that. We listen to Kat, who talks about the fact that she has an eating disorder, which she can try to control, and sometimes she can. But the bottom line is, she knows that underneath that, it's all about anxiety. And the reason she stops eating is because it's the easiest way to numb out.
Quite.
And we talk about how numbing out is she plans and plans and plans and plans every interaction with every person in her life. And it goes wrong because she's so scared in the interactions, and she feels rejected and abandoned. And then she numbs out. And the more she numbs out and doesn't eat, the more alone she feels, the more she plans. She's caught in this wheel. And, what we help people see the emotional cascades and cycles they're caught in, and how that translates to relating to other people. When you feel ashamed of yourself, overwhelmed all the time, you don't trust your own body, you're not sure who you are, or whether you're even worth loving, you're not going to let other people in. I mean, this is the truth. So this is the situation we look at. We provide incredible safety. I'm going to say that because that's what we do. We're attachment-based folks, so we create safe haven. We can do it on a screen. I do it all the time. We've learned that in the last 2 years. And we create safety, and we help people see the patterns they're caught in and how they sort of just keep the trauma going. But in the end, that's useful, and that helps people get their emotional balance. But in the end, we take them through something we call the EFIT or EFT Tango, which is a set of interventions. We take them into these corrective experiences, and I've started to think about them as they're corrective emotion experiences where people touch their vulnerability, but in a new way, and are able to walk through it in a new way. But they're also always powerful identity dramas, right? So, for example, a classic one is my client Alison, who was abused by her brothers, the one who suffered in silence. And when she first comes to me, she says, well, you know, I'm alone and I can't let people in, and I'm angry all the time, and I'm unhappy, and I've got all these diagnoses, and but I'm not into feeling. I don't want to feel. I don't like feelings. I don't want to feel anything. So
Yeah.
I say, okay. So then, if you're an EFTer, you stay with the block and you go into it and you say, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, what do you feel? When do you feel it? What's it like? What's going to happen if you stay with that? So we gradually create an alliance, but we end up in a corrective emotion experience where Alison is able to remember, because that's another thing, we block these key moments out. Remember and actually talk to me about the fact that when she was at night, when she knew that her brothers were going to come for her, she would crawl under her bed to the furthest place and put her back against the wall and hold her favorite toy. And she'd sit there in the dark and the cold all night to avoid, right?
Yeah.
And at a certain point, she gets safe enough to stay with me. She can't stay for a long time. You have to watch people's window of tolerance. But she gets comfortable enough for me to say, if you look under the bed, can you close your eyes? She said, no, I don't like closing my eyes. I said, I understand, but I'm going to ask you to try it just for a minute. She says, you want me to close my eyes because when I close my eyes, I can see more and feel more. I said, yes, that's right. Well, I'll try it. Okay, so I say, can you look under the bed and can you see her? And the little Alison who's under the bed. The adult Alison who did survive, who's talking to me, who is talking about her emotions, who has taken risks, right? Who knows that she's not borderline or OCD. The adult Alison who's being so brave talking to me. Can you look under the bed and see her face? First of all, she says no. Right? I said, could you just sit there in the dark with her? And then she says, I see her face. I say, and this is an encounter with core affect, with deep vulnerability. And sometimes what comes up is deep fear, but often what comes up is deep grief and sadness. Okay. So I say, can you see her face? And she says, yes. I say, can you just stay there for a minute and be with her? And she says, yes. I say, could you speak to her? She says, no. I say, okay. She will eventually, right? But I say, what would you like to do? She says, I'll just go and hold her. I say, okay, let's just do that just for a minute. And then I'll hold her there for a while, order her experience, process it with her. Then I'll come out and give her, validate her and talk about her courage and talk about how she's starting to take risks to let other people in. And that's the kind of experience I'm talking about, where you go in and you accept and hold and provide comfort to the small, vulnerable part of you, right? Of course, there are other experiences, like you might confront the mother. I remember sitting with somebody who would walk out of the room when her father started to abuse her. And, the grief around the mother was enormous. And she managed at one point to close her eyes and say to her mother, how could you do that? I didn't matter. Nobody saw me. You didn't see my pain. My pain didn't matter to you. These are emotional dramas that we hold in our heads and that always have terrible endings. And what we do in EFIT is they're loaded with emotion. So you have to hold people for them to be in them. You go into them, and people from a new place of emotional balance and empowerment, they can confront the people who betrayed them. They can relate to their vulnerability in a different way. John Bowlby says that strength is being able to go into your vulnerability and accept it, right? And just doing that, it's like there's a solution. You follow the emotion out. You weep, And then she starts to say, I'm not depressed and I'm not borderline. What I am is intensely sad.
Different
Right?
narrative. Yeah.
Different narrative, different new sense of affect. And of course, if you're immensely sad, you can turn and risk saying that to somebody else. Right?
Yeah.
And you have the judgment to know if that person's going to comfort you. So this is attachment, gives us a map to our longings, our griefs, our worst fears, our fears about ourselves, how we get trapped in shame. And if we know how to work with these emotions, we can take people into and through them. And so, we just put out a primer this year on EFIT, emotionally focused individual therapy. And my favorite line from that primer is me working with my client, Henny. There's lots of transcripts in that book. And what I love is that Henny did not remember her rapes from her father. She just knew they happened. She watched them happen to her sisters. And then she does remember. She does remember. But this time I'm beside her. I'm with her. I'm with her all the way through it. Right? And she remembers, and it's very difficult. And she's able to go and hold the self that was lying on the floor, devastated, betrayed by her father, told that she was nothing, that she didn't matter. She was able to go and hold that self and comfort herself. But then when she comes in the next session, I say, Henny, I've been thinking about you. I've been a little worried about you. Last session was so hard. It was so hard. I felt it. It was so hard for me to hear it. She said, yes, it was really hard. I said, well, how are you? She said, I'm fine. And I was like, you're fine? You're fine? She said, yes, Sue, because now I have me. And that's very interesting. When you start to be able to acknowledge and count on and accept and go through your emotions and listen to them and order them, you start to be able to count on you. You start to be able to define you, create a coherent sense of self, define who you are, and feel stronger.
And so we're going to be hearing even more about this next week on the Women's Trauma Summit. And I know that you have just given us really a little taste, almost like a canapé of
No, I've given it all to you, Tracy. I'm just going to sit and tell jokes.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I'll be signing up for that. But
all right.
Jokes aside, so next week, people will learn a lot more about EFIT. We have your trainings on EFIT, and it's been, as you've been talking about, being the research that is coming out in terms of helping women who have suffered whatever sort of abuse in its complexity as well. EFIT is definitely a corrective model for some of these horrific experiences that some of our clients and patients might have and probably will have suffered. So, Sue, we're looking forward to having you next week. I can't wait to be on that. And for all of you out there, please do join us. It's the 3rd International Women's Summit next Thursday and Friday. I think that's the 10th and 11th of November. And join women from all over the world while we come together to help put our brains together to help heal women's trauma. Thank you so much.
Let's do that.
Great. Thanks, Sue. And we'll see you next week.
I spoke too much. I hope that was all right.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Thank you for hanging in through the technical stuff. I don't even know how to get out of here now.